What's up, guys? Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we are talking about summertime crankbait fishing. I have some tips and some tricks to help you catch more fish on crankbaits right now. Fishing deep diving crankbaits is one of the most effective ways of catching schooling bass during the summer months and into fall. But for right now, we're talking about summertime schooling fish, fish out off of ledges, deep diving crankbaits, deflecting down off of bottom with their directional changes, their speed, the pauses. The things we're going to talk about today can help key into or trigger a bass to bite even though it doesn't want to. But a deep diving crankbait is one of the most effective ways to catch fish during the summer. So today we're going to talk about some tips and some tricks for crankbait fishing and how you can apply them to your fishing to help you catch more fish. Now, crankbait fishing, it might sound cliche or it might sound dumb, but matching the depth that the fish are in to the correct depth or diving depth of the crankbait you're throwing is a must. So if you're a guy that spends a lot of time on your electronics, or you're a guy that, you know, likes to fish offshore and you have those key spots, using those electronics or not, but finding those schools of fish, when you find those fish, or you know the depth of those fish are in, having a crankbait that routinely gets down deeper than the depth they are at will save you all the hassle in the world. You know, we're not having to kneel and reel and drop our rod tip. You know, the longer the cast, the better, obviously. But if you're finding fish or you're fishing for fish in that 15 to 18 foot range, get yourself a 20-foot diving crankbait, and that will save you the stress of having to kneel and reel and drop that rod tip. But it will get that bait down there and allows that bait to shine and really deflect off bottom and get those directional changes, get those pauses, and stay down, maintain that depth where those fish are, and you will get more bites. So as lame or as dumb as it sounds, make sure you're throwing the right crankbait for the depth that you're trying to fish, which is why you see a lot of these guys, which is why you see me, all have 2 or 3 or 4 crankbait rods tied up, because I'm gonna have different depths in the water column depending where these fish are, and then I'm going with different colors and or different sounds, whether it's loud or subdued or even silent. But number one tip, make it super easy on yourself. Get a crankbait that dives 2 or at least 2, but preferably a little bit more than the depth that you're finding the fish at, okay? You know, these deep diving crankbaits, sometimes we're throwing them down to 25 feet. Okay, we're finding fish down there in 22, 23, 24 foot. We want a crankbait that can get down there and get down there quickly and then maintain that depth to effectively fish the most bottom area to get a bite. So make sure you're throwing as basic as it sounds, make sure you're throwing the right crankbait depth for the job. Okay, that was my number one tip. I know it's super basic, but it's really important. A lot of times, you know, you see these guys that are fishing a crankbait that'll get down to, you know, 15, 16 feet or so, and they're trying to hit a brush pile down at 18 feet. So they're down there on their knees, they're throwing their back outs, they're doing everything they can. They're going super light line, 8-pound fluorocarbon. They're trying to get that bait down, when realistically, if available, getting a crankbait that goes a little bit deeper would save you all that back pain and struggle. But I know that there's certain crankbaits that have a certain action or a certain sound that might not get down to those depths, which is where you need to go lighter line or make longer casts or kneel and reel. But for the most part, day in and day out, getting a crankbait that will hit that depth or a little bit deeper will save your back a ton of pain, and you will catch more fish because you're effectively fishing more of that bottom. Okay, that leads me to my next tip or point. In bass fishing, there's been a huge swing in like downsized reels, downsized gear, downsized line, downsized baits for more pressured fish. Crankbait fishing is still one of those techniques where especially if I'm going with larger line, I like a 200 size reel just for the line capacity. Okay, I want to be able to cast this bait as far as I can. You know, it's all about angles. The farther you cast, the easier it is for this bait to get down to its depth, and then the longer it stays at that depth, so you're actually fishing more area effectively before it turns and comes up to the boat or shoreline or wherever you're fishing from. But the longer the cast makes it easier, it makes a sharper dive angle, okay? Less resistance, it's easier for that bait to get down, and then now you're fishing it more effectively through those key areas before it comes up to you on your boat. So having that extra line capacity, having a 150 size or a 200 size spool or reel will give you longer casting distance, and it will actually help you fish more of the area that you're trying to fish effectively. So that's another tip. Make sure you're going with whether it's a reel that has insane castability like the MGLs, like the Metanium, the MGLs, or a little bit larger 200 size reel, whether it's a Corrado or a Tranks or a Diet, whatever your favorite brand is, that having that 200 size spool just adds castability, distance to those casts, and makes you fish more efficiently. I know it sounds basic, but long casts, right? Having the correct crankbait running depth is super important, because maintaining that bottom contact is really what makes the crankbait shine over, you know, a swim bait or something that you're fishing near bottom, but you're not deflecting and changing directions and backing up and speeding up. You know, you can't do that with a lot of baits, but the crankbait, that's what makes it so special. So if you're trying to get better at being a crankbait fisherman or catch more fish throwing crankbaits, maintaining bottom contact is really, really important. Now, with that said, Matt and I, we've caught tons of fish that were suspended on crankbaits. You know, whether we're wintertime fishing with our speed crank and we're changing the cadence with our reel, right? Burn, 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 pause. We're changing that movement, not really side to side, but we're changing the speed. We're changing how that bait reacts. We're giving it its own motion. We're having to do a lot of that with the handle turns, with the reel twitches. But having a correct crankbait diving at the right depth down there, hitting stuff, dredging bottom, and then deflecting off of a rock or a tree branch or whatever hard piece of cover it may be, 9 times out of 10, when I'm reeling and I hit something and I pause it, dong, that's when I get bit. Those fish are down there tracking. As soon as that bait deflects left or deflects right or deflects up or pauses, when you have those directional changes or those cadence changes, that's what makes the crankbait so much, so special and so much more has the ability so much more to trigger those bites, to get those fish to lash out and eat, right? We call it that cat and mouse game. When you're burning that crankbait by, and we're talking about burning, we're burning all these things. We're not down there just, you know, hum-da-dum-da-dum. Even these big boys, right? We're throwing them fast. That's why it's really important to have the right gear. We're gonna talk about that here shortly over the cicadas. But, you know, we're down there fishing these things fast. We're making them deflect. We're giving those reel changes, those cadence changes. But having a crankbait, getting down to the right depth, maintaining that bottom contact is key, okay? So make sure that you're throwing a crankbait that will get down to the depth where you're seeing the fish on the electronics, okay? So, and if you're not seeing the fish, if you're not a guy that has electronics, maybe you're fishing a long tapering point, or maybe you're fishing, let's change it up. Maybe you're fishing a point that comes out near a channel swing, and you know that point is in 16 feet of water. Grab yourself a crankbait that will get down to 18 feet. That way you could bomb it out past them with a 150 or 200 size reel. Get that thing down out there before it comes across that key point, and then when you hit that point, stop it. Or burn, 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 hit that point, stop it. Pop, pop, give that bait some action, and that's when those fish are going to react. So make sure that you're not only maintaining bottom contact, but you're throwing way past the area that you want to fish and have that bait down. So when that crankbait gets to that key area, that key piece of cover that you're trying to deflect off of or fish, that your bait's already down there and it's running properly. Now, another tip for you. That same example that same picture that I just painted, right? There's that point out there that goes out into deep water, but it's in 16 feet. A mistake that I make, I used to make, I didn't change up my angles as much as I needed to. And what we've learned through the years is a lot of times fish are stubborn and they want to eat a certain way for whatever reason, right? I don't care if you're throwing it 100 times, you're making the right bottom contact, you're getting the right deflection. There have been times when I've completely switched and changed my cast angle and came across a different direction, and then boom, all of a sudden now I'm getting bites. So tip number 3, I think it's 3, if you are fishing a certain area or a key piece of cover or structure, whether it be a brush pile or a rock pile or a shell bed or a laydown, whatever it is, right? Whatever the thing is that you're fishing and you're casting past, after you've done your casts, change direction and make the different casts, okay? You're still coming across that key piece of cover, but you're changing your direction. And again, you're adding your reel twitches, you're adding your pauses, you're adding your deflection, whatever you're doing, but make sure you're changing the casting angles so that your bait is hitting that key piece of whatever at different angles. That is huge. I don't know what it is. I've done it with swim baits for years. Certain fish like to eat certain ways for whatever reason. So if you're a guy that loves throwing a crankbait, you probably already know this, but if you're a guy that's just beginning throwing a crankbait or a gal throwing a crankbait, changing up your angles can be the one difference you can make to get those fish to fire up and eat. And with that said, this is the time where fish have kind of schooled up. So it's not uncommon to catch several fish in a row while they're all fired up, to catch several fish, multiple fish on the same cast. You know, hook 2 fish on a crankbait. Now is the time that type of stuff happens. But tip number 3, if you've beat up that if you've made that cast over and over with the right crankbait, the right distance cast, make sure you're changing your angles. All right, so now that we talked about the things you can do to effectively fish your crankbait better or more effectively, let's talk about some of my favorite crankbaits and gear. Now, summertime cranking, like I said in the intro, can be extremely productive. Deep cranking. You know, you can, I'm not talking shallow cranking or throwing a lipless or anything like that. I'm talking deep cranks, anywhere from 12 to 25 feet, okay? Deep cranking is a staple in summertime offshore fishing. If it's not for you or you haven't learned how to do it, hopefully this video will give you the confidence to try it, because it is so much fun. And there are days when you can trigger, when you can key into that fish's key, like its predatory instinct, where it has to lash out and eat. Having those directional changes down there in 12, 15, 18, 20, 25 feet is something that these fish, you know, have to react to. So the baits. Let's start the, we'll talk about baits, colors, and then we'll talk about gear, because having the right gear, crankbait fishing is one of the most important techniques, special techniques, where I feel like you need the right gear to minimize the amount of lost fish. So to capitalize better on your bites, you want to have the right gear. Okay, so let's talk baits. So summertime, you can fish aggressively, right? We can fish fast, we can fish deep, or burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause, burn, 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 pause. You hit that hard piece of structure, you pause it, you get that directional change, boom, they're gonna smoke it. We're throwing bright colors, your chartreuses, your blues, okay? Your bright colors, because these fish are aggressive. Typically summertime, you have algae blooms, you have sediment in the water, you don't have a lot of visibility. So obviously if I have more visibility, I won't go as loud or as bright. But with that said, these fish are aggressive. So I'm going bright, I'm going loud. And then if I find that I'm not getting as many bites as I think I should, that's when I will change colors. That's when I will change rattles or sound. But for the most part, I'm going brighter colors. You know, some stuff that has some bright yellows or chartreuse and blues, something that has some bright colors, whether it's like a metallic shad, real flashy. Again, that's a great color in the Strike King line. That has caught so many fish for me. And then the Rapalas, the powder blues, okay? Still kind of that shad color, but you're having those brighter colors. These fish see them from a long ways away. They see them in that dirtier, warmer water, and they come unglued for them. Now, as we get into like August and we start kind of thinking about that fall transition, that's when we're kind of back away from the loud baits, back away from the bright baits, go more of the natural colors. But right now you can get away with bright colors and loud baits. Now, real quickly, if you're on a fishery where you have a ton of visibility, the water clarity is awesome, then you can still go with like your natural bluegill colors, your natural ghost minnows, or your, you know, stuff with some chrome, more iridescent colors. But you will have, you know, start out with your bright colors first and see if you can catch them on that, and then go with your more natural colors. Because I've had so many times where I've caught in clear water a ton of fish on like a chartreuse and blue crankbait. So that's colors. As far as sound, real quick, for the most part, I'm throwing semi-loud crankbaits. That's the 10XD. We're gonna talk about baits here shortly. Here's the 6XD, right? Tactical crank, a little bit more subtle. Rapala DT series, a little bit higher, pingier pitch. And then that D-Track by Nomad thing is like a lipless crankbait down there. What's cool about this bait, this is the 65. It gets down 15 feet, 3/4 ounce bait. It's the loudest out of all the crankbaits that I throw. But what's cool about this crankbait specifically, or the no bag crankbaits, is they have a self-tuning line tie that's built into the bill of your bait. So when you tie on to that split ring, all other crankbaits, when you throw them out in the water, this is another tip for you guys, always check your crankbaits, because when you're fishing them effectively and you're down there grinding bottom, you're down there deflecting, you'll have to eventually, well, you're gonna have to retie a lot, but you're also going to, I'm all wrapped up, you're going to have to tune your crankbait. So I'm always checking my crankbait just up close, reeling it straight. So like this one is going a little to the right. To get this crankbait's maximum depth, you want it diving straight down. You don't want it diving to the left or diving to the right. You want it going straight down. So you take a little pair of pliers and you just subtly bend where that split ring clips onto that loop in the bill and adjust the angle of that line tie, and that will straighten your bait back up. You're always gonna have to tune crankbaits, it's just part of the deal. Well, this has a self-tuning, it moves, so it allows that bait to always run true. So if you're on a fishery that will eat those loud baits, that D-Track, the 65 and the 80 are awesome, awesome baits. What's also cool about this one is it's a smaller profile that gets down to that 15, 18 foot range. So if you're on a fishery that needs a little bit smaller crankbait, that one works really well. Now, the staple in everybody's, for the most part, everybody's summertime cranking is the Strike King 6XD. It's been a staple for years, whether it's the knocking or the silent. That is, in my opinion, one of the most common or most used crankbaits out there. The flip side, or the downside, is these fish have seen thousands of Strike King 6XDs, whether the silent or the rattling, or, you know, it's an 8XD or a 10XD, but the 6XD, it's a fish catcher. There's a reason why so many guys throw it. It's the reason why I throw it. But with that said, now that we're in that July, summertime fishing, these fish have seen a lot of baits. That's where I might start off with this, but then I might follow it up with the Tactical DD. More of a subtle, it still gets down to like 15, 18 foot, but it's more of a subtle, tighter kick, a different sounding bait, different wobbling bait. Those of you guys that followed the channel for a long time know that in wintertime, you want a bait that has a real tight wobble. It's what we specifically designed this bait for, but it works extremely well in the summertime too, following behind some of those more aggressive, wide wobbling crankbaits, okay? And then also, kind of like a 1, 2, 3 punch, that Rapala DT series. It's got a fairly wide wobble, but it's more of a subtle bait. A wider bill, it deflects extremely well. So that's kind of like my 1, 2, 3 punch if I'm fishing an area with a crankbait. The DT16, the DT20, DT stands for dives 2. So you have it literally built into the bill. It tells you what that crankbait dives down to. With that said, another tip, if you're a guy like me and you have a ton of crankbaits, and you get them really dialed, and you know with like 12-pound fluorocarbon, this bait will get down to 17 feet. Take a Sharpie and write 17 on your bill. That way you don't have to remember all of the different depths. I do it a ton on my square bills, because you guys know there's so many different square bills that'll dive 0 to 2, 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to, you know, so 4 to 5. So I'm always writing the max depth that crankbait will go. Maybe it's a little bit on the, you know, it's right, 18 right there on the forehead of the bait or on the bill itself. It doesn't matter. But having that number, you know, Rapala is the only company I know that does it. Have it built into the bill makes it super easy to remember the depth that it dives down to. Now, going all the way back to the beginning of this video, if you're fishing that point out there in 16 feet, you probably don't want to throw a DT 16 because it's at its deepest with 12-pound fluorocarbon, unless you go down to 10-pound or something, it's going to get down to 16. Throw that DT 20, make a long cast, and bring that thing, just let it dredge down there and grind, and then work that thing through the cover down there and let it deflect and do its thing. So choosing the crankbait for the right depth of the job is really, really important, okay? So we talked about colors, we talked about baits, the Magnum crankbaits, deep diving crankbaits, the 20+ footers, 20, 22, 25. Strike King 10XD has caught so many giants for us through the years. That thing is an awesome, awesome deep diving crankbait. Azuma makes a great one. The 20, the 22, that's a great bait as well. So I don't have nearly as many different mag deep diving crankbaits. You know, that 10XD, the Azuma, the Megabass, Big M, when you can get them, they've been back ordered forever. That's another killer bait. But those are awesome. Now, the difference with these guys, when they're getting down to that depth, you can see by the size of the bait and the size of the bill, this thing is going to pull on your shoulder, elbow, back, neck, so much more than this one. So when you're throwing these big crankbaits, having the right gear, one, to make the long cast, but two, having a rod that loads deep into the midsection helps with two things. It helps with, I don't want to throw this thing out here because I'm sitting in like 8 feet and I'm just gonna get hung up throwing a 22-foot diving crankbait. But it helps with two things. It helps with saving the, it kind of gives and takes on the cranks, right? So it saves your elbow, it saves your forearm, your shoulder. It launches this thing like a catapult, so you can get this thing, I mean, having a 200 size spool on there, you could cast this thing a long ways. But most importantly, I touched on this a little bit earlier, when you do get that bait eaten, you do get that bite, having that rod load down all the way to the midsection helps keep those fish pegged. You know, they might only have one of the back hooks in the roof of their mouth or on the side of their mouth. When they come up, you've made that long bomber cast. When they come up 30 yards out there and tail walk and you see that big old 10XD flying side to side in their mouth, you want to have the right rod to keep them pegged. Yes, you could go throw this on your favorite jig rod or your favorite swim bait rod, but it's not gonna be the right rod for the job and you will lose fish, I promise you. Not having the correct cranking rod is super, super important. So for our deep cranks, you know, that 12, let's say 12 to 18 foot, the Loomis, this undone, the Loomis 906 CBR has a soft tip, a real strong midsection. It allows you to send this bait off the horizon. It's not too hard to fish this thing fast. This is an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. This is a Metadium MGL XG. Like, I'm burning this thing, I get it down, I pause, burn, pause. I kind of give the rod to it to make that bait stop in its tracks. But I'm feeling it in my forearm just a little bit, but that rod is doing all the work. And then when I do hook up and I smash that fish, I now have a rod that's gonna load and unload slowly. If you have something that loads and unloads quickly, like you'd want for like a jig or a finesse style bait, not a treble hook bait, it's going to unload and now you've lost all the pressure on that hook to keep that fish pegged. So you want that slow load and unload. So when that fish comes up and jumps, that rod is still loaded and you still have that fish pegged. But again, that 906 is such a workhorse. Another really good one is the Big Cranker by St. Croix. St. Croix has rods. They're typically a little bit slower than some of the other brands, but they work extremely well, especially for their cranking rods, work extremely well. That guy right there. And then for the big boys, same thing. It's a Loomis 969 CBR. Again, it's a catapult, sends this thing a long ways. It has all the same action and does the same things as that 906. It's just a little bit stronger. Okay, it's made for these big shovel build crankbaits down there dredging bottom. But guys, don't be afraid to throw a crankbait. Don't be afraid to play with different depths on your crankbaits, because there are days when these fish move up and they're in 12 foot and you need a DT 12, right? Or there are days when these fish are down in 22 foot where you need a 10XD or a 25 foot diving crankbait. They won't eat the swim bait. They won't eat the hair jig or the Carolina rig. You need something down there dredging bottom and deflecting and changing directions, and they straight smoke it. And guys, another tip for you: if you do catch one fish, get it in, get that bait back out there, because if you catch that one fish, it might be the smallest fish in the school. Hopefully it's the largest fish in the school, but if not, get that bait back in there, and 9 times out of 10, let me back up, not 9 times out of 10, a lot of times, if there are more fish, you will keep that fish or that school fired up and you can catch fish over and over and over again. But 9 times out of 10, for me, I get those bites when I deflect off of something, or I add that pause and I change that bait's momentum and speed, and that's when I get bit. But guys, summertime cranking, bright colors, you can go with loud baits, knocker baits, whatever you want, but change through that to see what those fish want. But all these baits, oh, fish just boiled right there, never fails. I will link all this stuff down below in the video description. But remember, make sure you're throwing a bait that it will dive a little bit deeper than the area you're trying to fish. One other tip: throwing a crankbait. I talked about it earlier. You know, fish suspended, right? Getting in those reel twitches, rod twitches, reel changes, changing the cadence. You know, I can make that bait come and go basically with those reel twitches. If you're fishing a brush pile that's down in 16 feet, right? Throw a crankbait that'll get down. So that brush pile is in 16 feet, maybe it has branches that come up to like 12 feet or so. Throw in like a DT 12 or some kind of 12-foot diving crankbait. You don't have to be on bottom to come through the base of that brush pile, but if you just tick the tops of the branches and you get that same thing, you get that deflection, or you get that change of direction, you can catch a lot of fish doing that as well. You don't actually have to be down on bottom. These fish will come unglued for a crankbait deflecting off of a tree branch or a brush pile branch. But guys, as always, I will link all the stuff down below in the video description, our favorite colors, hook upgrades for the crankbaits, the rods, the reels, the line, all that good stuff. But if you have not tried a crankbait, you're missing out. It is a very productive, very effective bait to throw right now. Guys, as always, we appreciate the support. If you learned something from this video or you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you guys on the next video.